What happens when you push away a feeling? The effort itself creates tension. You're experiencing something you don't want, and now you're also experiencing the strain of trying not to experience it. Two layers instead of one. And the feeling, rather than fading, often intensifies precisely because you're working so hard to keep it at bay. This is the core problem with forced positivity. It multiplies distress. The original difficulty remains, but now there's also the exhaustion of suppression, the shame of not being positive enough, the isolation of hiding what's real. You end up carrying more weight, not less. The white bear experiments showed this in controlled conditions, but you've probably noticed it in your own life. The thoughts you try hardest not to think become the ones that intrude most persistently. The emotions you work to avoid become the ones that leak through at inconvenient moments. The harder you grip, the more slips through your fingers. And there's the cognitive cost. Your mind is busy monitoring for signs of the forbidden content, while simultaneously trying to maintain the acceptable content. That monitoring and maintenance takes mental energy. Energy you could be using to actually address problems, to connect with people, to do work that matters. Instead, you're spending it on emotional management theater, performing positivity while fighting your actual experience. Toxic positivity operates in social spaces, but it often starts internally. You've internalized messages about which emotions are acceptable and which need to be corrected. Maybe from a family that didn't tolerate sadness. Maybe from a culture that treats anxiety as weakness. Maybe from workplaces that demand enthusiasm regardless of circumstances. Those messages become the voice that tells you to look on the bright side when you're struggling, to be grateful when you're hurting, to stay positive when what you actually need is to acknowledge that things are hard. The neuroscience here is clarifying. When you label an emotion accurately, when you say this is grief, or this is frustration, or this is dread, something shifts. The prefrontal cortex engages, the amygdala calms, not because you've solved anything, but because you've brought symbolic processing to bear on raw arousal. You've moved from being swept up in the feeling to observing and naming it. That shift itself is regulatory. But the naming has to be genuine. Slapping a positive label on something that doesn't feel positive doesn't work. Telling yourself you're excited when you're actually terrified doesn't engage the regulatory mechanism. It just adds another layer of distortion. The regulation comes from accuracy, from finding the words that actually match what you're experiencing. This is why emotional granularity matters. When you can distinguish between 17 types of discomfort, you're not just being pedantic, you're giving yourself information. Resentment suggests something different than disappointment. Anxiety suggests something different than grief. The specific emotion points toward what might help. But you can only access that information if you're willing to look closely at what you're feeling, rather than rushing to replace it with something more palatable. Acceptance doesn't mean you like what's happening. It doesn't mean you think it's good, or that you're giving up on change. It means you're acknowledging reality as it is right now. This situation is difficult. This emotion is present. This is what's happening. That acknowledgement doesn't make the difficulty worse. It often makes it more manageable because you're not also fighting the reality of the difficulty. When you accept that you're anxious, you can decide what to do while anxious. When you insist you shouldn't be anxious, that you need to calm down and think positive, you're stuck. You can't take effective action because you're busy having an internal argument about whether the anxiety should exist. The acceptance ends the argument. The anxiety is here. Now what? Values provide direction when emotions are turbulent. If you're waiting to feel confident before you take action, you might wait forever. If you're waiting for your anxiety to resolve before you do something challenging, you've made anxiety the gatekeeper of your life. But if you know what matters to you, you can move toward it regardless of how you feel in the moment. You can be anxious and still make the phone call. You can be sad and still show up for someone who needs you. You can be uncertain and still take the next step. This is psychological flexibility, not the absence of difficult emotions, but the capacity to have those emotions present while you do what you care about. The emotions don't control your behavior. They're part of your experience, part of the information you're working with, but they're not in charge. The depletion research makes it clear why this matters practically. Suppression is expensive. Every moment you're forcing yourself to feel something other than what you actually feel, you're using resources. resources you need for thinking clearly, for staying patient, for persisting when things are difficult. Chronic suppression means chronic depletion, which means you're operating at partial capacity, even when you most need your full capacity. Acceptance doesn't cost that. When you let a feeling be present, when you stop fighting it, the struggle ends. You might not like the feeling, but you're not also exhausted from trying to make it disappear. The resources that would have gone to suppression remain available for other things. And there's the social dimension. Humans regulate emotions together. A baby doesn't calm down alone. An adult in distress doesn't process it best in isolation. We're built to share emotional experiences and to have those experiences met with understanding. When that happens, stress markers go down, arousal decreases, the nervous system settles. But co-regulation requires that you can share what's actually happening. If you're only allowed to share the positive version, the sanitized version, the version that won't make anyone uncomfortable, you don't get the regulatory benefit. You get the loneliness of performing okay while feeling terrible. Relationships deepen through shared vulnerability, through moments when one person is struggling and the other stays present without needing to fix it immediately. That presence communicates something fundamental. Your distress isn't too much for me. I can be here with you in this. That message is regulating in a way that cheerful reassurance never is. The distinction between genuine reappraisal and forced positivity comes down to honesty. Sometimes seeing a situation differently actually changes how it feels. You realize you misunderstood someone's intentions, and your anger shifts. You recognize that a setback opens a possibility you hadn't considered, and your disappointment coexists with curiosity. That's genuine reframing. Your understanding changed, so your emotional response changed. But when you're just telling yourself to look on the bright side without actually seeing anything different, when you're imposing a positive interpretation that doesn't fit your real assessment of the situation, that's not reappraisal. That's suppression with extra steps. You're adding cognitive effort to emotional effort, and neither is resolving the underlying response. Post-traumatic growth happens through engagement with difficulty, not through denial of it. People who eventually find meaning after trauma don't get there by pretending the trauma wasn't that bad. They get there by struggling with the reality of what happened, by working to integrate an experience that shattered their previous understanding of that, how the world works. That integration takes time, and it takes willingness to sit with painful truths. Trying to rush someone to the growth part, telling them everything happens for a reason before they've even processed what happened, that prevents the integration. It treats the growth as something you can access by thinking right, instead of as something that might emerge through genuine struggle. And it communicates that their current distress is unacceptable, which adds invalidation to trauma. Self-compassion offers a way through. When things are hard, you can acknowledge that they're hard, and that you're doing your best. You can recognize that everyone struggles sometimes, that difficulty is part of being human, not evidence that you're uniquely flawed. You can treat yourself with kindness instead of criticism. That kindness doesn't make the hard thing less hard, but it removes the layer of self-judgment that often makes difficult situations worse. And self-compassion predicts better outcomes than self-esteem, which is interesting. Self-esteem fluctuates with success and failure. It feels good when things go well and drops when they don't. Self-compassion remains stable because it's not contingent on performance. You deserve kindness whether you're succeeding or failing, whether you're handling things well or barely managing. That stability is what allows you to keep showing up even when things aren't going well. The research across all these domains points in the same direction. Emotional well-being doesn't come from feeling positive all the time. It comes from being able to work with your full emotional range flexibly and compassionately. It comes from relationships where authentic experience is welcome. It comes from choosing actions based on values rather than on avoiding discomfort. It comes from self-kindness when things are difficult. None of this is easy to implement, especially if you've spent years learning that negative. Emotions are problems to solve rather than information to consider. The habit of rushing toward positivity is deep for many people. Breaking that habit means catching yourself in the middle of trying to force a feeling and choosing to pause instead, to notice what's actually present, to name it accurately, to let it be there while you decide what matters. It means resisting cultural messages that treat positivity as mandatory and negativity as failure. It means sometimes disappointing people who want you to cheer up or look on the bright side, because you're choosing to honor your actual experience instead. It means building relationships with people who can tolerate the full range of human emotion, who don't need you to be okay all the time. And it means extending that same tolerance to others. When someone shares difficulty, staying present without rushing to fix or reframe, validating that what they're experiencing makes sense, creating space for them to feel what they need. Feel without judgment. That's harder than offering reassurance, but it's what actually helps. Forced positivity feels caring in the moment of offering it. But what looks like care is often discomfort dressed up as helpfulness. You're uncomfortable with someone's pain, so you try to make it go away so you can feel better. The forced positivity serves your need for comfort more than their need for support. Real support means being uncomfortable sometimes. It means sitting with someone's distress without needing to eliminate it immediately. It means trusting that they can handle their own emotions if they have companionship rather than solutions. It means your regulated presence rather than your cheerful reassurance. The takeaway isn't complicated, even if living it requires practice. Stop trying to eliminate negative emotions in yourself or others. They're not problems, they're responses. Sometimes uncomfortable ones, but responses that make sense given what's happening. Accept that they're present. Name them accurately. Let them inform your understanding without controlling your choices. Treat yourself with kindness when you're struggling. Offer genuine validation to others when they are. That's what allows people to actually thrive. Not the absence of difficulty or the maintenance of constant positivity, but the development of a workable relationship with reality as it is. Resilience built on flexibility rather than rigidity. Connection built on authenticity rather than performance. Progress made while carrying pain rather than waiting for pain to resolve before moving forward. The research is clear enough to trust. What looks like the path to well-being, forcing positivity, suppressing negativity, maintaining an upbeat facade, that path leads to depletion, isolation, and amplified distress. The actual path is less shiny and more honest. It involves acknowledging what's difficult, being kind to yourself about it, staying connected to what matters, and allowing others to do the same. That's not as marketable as just think positive, but it actually works.